A few days ago now at the Xbox Games Showcase, we finally got to see some more of Playground Games' Fable. If nothing else, it was to remind us that this game does indeed still exist. And that's good news in itself, I suppose, because the announcement trailer was more or less 3 years ago now, and though I was under no illusion that it was going to be releasing anytime soon at that point, 3 years of total radio silence as well as one tweet hinting at announcing something Fable related on a specific day and then never doing that, thanks Microsoft, is slightly underwhelming. And besides that, all we really got were rumours telling us that this game was bouncing between different phases of development hell. So all we had really was this CG teaser showing us a fantasy setting, almost fairy tale-esque, with that humorous tone that Fable is known for. And honestly, as time went on, I was expecting that Microsoft started hoping we'd forgotten about it. Well, the good news that came on the 11th of June is the wheels are spinning, because this is now in-game footage, apparently. I have no reason whatsoever to doubt that, but apparently people are. Just because it says in-game footage doesn't necessarily mean the game will look this great when it releases. It's just using the game engine and actual cutscenes and things like that, and footage recorded for the purpose of this trailer within the game in its current state. But it is subject to change, and I've seen so many game downgrades that I wouldn't be shocked, but benefit of the doubt, let's just leave it at that. Regardless, we as the consumers should be able to take this as reliable. If it's not, that's on Microsoft and Playground Games, so we can compliment how aesthetically pleasing the trailer looks. However, it shows off the fantasy/fairy tale-esque almost style and the tone of comedy and humour, but it doesn't really tell us an awful lot about how this is going to translate into a game. So outside of the back end of the trailer, where we see what I presume is our main protagonist fighting a giant in some set-piece-like format, it's arguable that the trailer is perhaps too light on information to make it actually worthwhile in any way. Oh, But regardless, it's good to see that development on Fable is coming along, because after all, this is in-game footage. So perhaps it makes it worthwhile in itself, because it simply tells us that Fable is indeed happening. But what's worth remembering is this is a different studio's take on Fable, as Lionhead Studios, the studio originally behind the Fable games, has been dissolved for some time now. So Playground Games do have some questions to answer regarding whether or not they can do justice to the franchise. And whilst the trailer doesn't have anything that screams yes, it just also doesn't have anything that screams no. And what I mean by that is Fable games of the past have been an incredibly lively experience in several ways. And those are ways that many games have attempted to replicate and fail. Set in a fictional nation known as Albion, Fable is primarily based on medieval Britain and Europe, and then in later installments takes inspiration from later periods of history such as the Industrial Revolution in 3, and it both takes itself seriously enough that you can become immersed in that world, but not so seriously that it doesn't make fun of itself, with a fanciful, albeit sarcastic sense of humour that's designed to be amusing rather than impactful. At least not in the immediate sense. As a result, the world of Fable, 1 and 2 especially actually, is incredibly charming. I also have to admit that I love Fable 3, please don't shoot me against the nearest lamppost. But the thing is, despite a million reasons why it shouldn't be, the Fable franchise is absolutely unique. And not only that, but the individual installments are unique from each other too. And though they were far from perfect games, they've lived long in many people's memories as a result, including my own. So with the advancements of video game technology since the last meaningful Fable installment, yes, this game certainly has an awful lot to live up to. And that in itself is a cause for concern out the gate, because on paper it's completely incompatible with modern video game design philosophy. And I'm not targeting Playground or any specific studio for that. The landscape has simply changed drastically since Fable 3. The Fable games are short RPGs that didn't really require much grinding, nor did they require massive open worlds of any description, whereas today, when it comes to an open world at least, gargantuan games are the norm. Because not only do publishers these days monetize the publishing of the game, there's also a heavy demand for expansions to those games should they perform well, though that in itself isn't new. But there's also more microtransactions these days, not saying this new Fable game is going to have any, and then on top of that there's tracking how many hours people are playing the game for and exactly what they're doing, what they're not doing, where they're succeeding and where they're failing. Effectively, they're harvesting data through us playing the game. And again, that's not specific to any one studio, any one publisher, or any one individual game necessarily, but I can think of many off the top of my head anyway, and I wouldn't be surprised if a month after this game's release, Xbox Game Studios posts a tweet telling us just how many chickens have been kicked. There are simply more eyes tracking player engagement, and that's become another quantity through which one can measure the success of a product. So as a result, the safest bet to please your investors is not just to sell the game, but also make it fucking mahoosive. Why? Because the technology is simply capable of that now. And if you don't push the boundaries of the technology you're provided with, for some reason that is shunned. But of course, I'd argue that logic is best applied on a case-by-case basis. And not every game that's released today strives to hit these ridiculous bars all of the time, because if they did, there would be far less games actually being released. And that's even after you consider, at least for AAA games, that already appears to be the case. And then the other concern is about Fable's integral sense of humour.
I'd like to come round to your house for tea. And then I'll have your mum. Broad shoulders, that square jaw. You are one weird-looking lady.
I'd personally advocate for Fable's sense of humour remaining majorly unmolested. It wasn't too outwardly offensive, but I can understand some jokes would not fly in today's climate. Of course, the idea of Fable being a modern take for today's sensibilities really makes me dread what they're going to do to bring it in step with whichever Twitter mob has the loudest voice. Humour in games has certainly been degraded over recent years. I have a few ideas where it has gone. Many games have released with this quirky, meaningless humour that just isn't that entertaining to me. It doesn't really punch in any direction, it's just safe humour. It isn't necessarily bad in itself, but I feel as if Fable doesn't need that restriction. But benefit of the doubt, that may not be what this is on about. It may be on about modernising the entire experience and not necessarily any one thing in particular. But at the same time, I simply cannot imagine Fable's irreverent sense of humour remaining uncompromised. Of course it's going to be different anyway, it's a different studio working on this game for one, it's also a different time and that was inevitable. But it's got to remain quaint because Fable narrates its own world building. The new trailer does somewhat well in this regard, I think, with Richard Ayoade playing a man named Dave who's a vegetable enthusiast who believes he's underappreciated in his community, otherwise he wouldn't be calling himself a hero when talking about actual heroes. He winds up growing giant pumpkins, and then becomes an antagonist by making himself a giant in a corrupted Jack and the Beanstalk story. And he's delivering a monologue about this. The humour in this trailer is best conveyed by the absurdity in the entire thing rather than any specific line of dialogue spoken, and having an undertone is perhaps the most important aspect to making Fable's humour effective. And then there's volleying chickens into the horizon, but that's a given, so props for that. It's good that the humour isn't all just surface level nonsense, but there certainly is some of that as well.
Wanker.
And that's kind of what you want, though. I hope the surface level stuff has more to it than simply expletives for impact.
Oh,
But the trailer indicated at least that Fable will remain true to its own ridiculousness, but to what extent it can accomplish that and then craft a convincing atmosphere besides that both functions with and without it, because, as I've said before, Fable has more to it than just its jokes. The jokey undertone is what highlights the absurdity of everything going on, but it disarms the fanciful elements and allows for a lived-in atmosphere to thrive as well. And that leaves us with one last topic of discussion, and that is that the new Fable trailer has sparked some controversy based on how this female protagonist looks. Who gives a shit? It's a classic example of the internet trying to eat itself alive over a redundant argument. Social media is a battlefield for polar opposites to fling shit at each other, and that's really all it is. The sooner people realise this, the sooner we can go back to just simply enjoying things. You can't expect to find common ground with somebody that you've never met and likely never will meet, because you can't humanise them on Twitter. And whilst it's good to engage in healthy discussions specifically about social issues or whatever takes your fancy, it's my opinion that you don't need to have an opinion on absolutely everything going, and the irony of that statement is certainly not lost on me. Answer me this, what does the attractiveness of pixels on a screen in a game really matter? I don't understand the train of thought in arguing this point or even arguing against it necessarily either. And the only reason I bring it up is because I'm certain every third comment will be about it. The fact that this needs to be discussed in any capacity is completely insane. But I'm sure I've had my fair share of insane discussions online too, so I can't judge. But no, I won't be taking that discussion, if you can even call it that, too seriously, because I simply have my own concerns for this new Fable, and that just is not one of them. So we've seen in-game footage now, but what we really need to see when it gets shown again, whether that be in a year, or 2 years, or 3 years, or whatever, I don't care at this point, is an actual lengthy demonstration of how all of these elements translate into a video game. Obviously, this is just a standard. We need to know how the game plays, we need to know how it fits within the Fable universe, specifically regarding where it's true to the titles that came before it, whilst also striking out and trying to modernise Fable simultaneously. I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic, but we still have limited information regarding what exactly this new take on Fable is going to be like. So in other words, my thoughts are summarised by fingers crossed it doesn't do a Saints Row reboot. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm not even sure what I'm going to title this video yet, but I do hope that you found it enjoyable, if nothing else. You don't have to agree with all my points, you can express your disagreement down in the comment section. After all, that's what it's there for. Or you can expand on my points if you so wish to do so down there as well. All I ask is that we remain respectful of other people's views down in the comment section, because in the end of the day, this is a video game and it's really not worth being a dick about. If you like this video and would like to see more, be sure to go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, maybe even share the channel with your friends, and all of that wonderful stuff. That would be super fantastic. And with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, please take care, and goodbye.